Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for joining. As mentioned, I'm Abigail Williams and I'm representing Liquitex today to talk to you all about the Liquitex inks. And that is, of course, themed to October because it is Inktober. So we're going to do a bit of a shout out to Inktober as we get into it. I'll just give you a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about, and then we'll get right into it. So I'll tell you what materials we're working with. There should have been a list as well when you signed up for this demo, so you can paint along if you'd like. I'm then going to talk about the differences between acrylic inks and alcohol inks. And then I'm just going to show you what you can do with a little bit of masking fluid, some paintbrushes, and your acrylic inks. So to start, materials, let's go over the inks first. I've got 6 colors here. I've got a bismuth, really vibrant yellow. It's one of the newer colors. There are now 55 colors in the ink set, which is up 20 from prior where there were only 35. There's Rubine red as well, right here, which is a really nice, rich, almost cool red. We get into an even cooler red here with Perylene Maroon, which is really nice and deep. It's almost I don't want to say a blood color, but it is very deep and could be very useful for you around Halloween. There's turquoise deep as well, which is a really vibrant green color. I have some of that on my hands already. I'm about to get more, I'm sure. And then we have 2 really interesting colors. We have one from the metallics line, which is the iridescent rich copper. And I think you can see some of that. Let me see if I can get the light on it better. You can see some of that iridescence there. It's a really strong metallic effect that I hope will come across on camera. It does come across in person. And we have a fluorescent red. We now have a suite of fluorescent colors. And they're just really, really vibrant for that really glowy effect that you always look for in a fluorescent. As for paintbrushes, we've got a round number 6. That's quite big. That will be nice for line making and coverage. And you're going to want a garbage brush, a brush you don't care about very much. This is what I'll be using here. I have also used one that I like a little bit more. And the reason we're going to be using this is to deal with the masking fluid, which has a risk of ruining a brush, but that really depends on how you treat it. And I'll get into that a little bit later, how to make sure that you aren't ruining your brushes with masking fluid. I'm also going to use an old fork, a plastic fork, and this is just for texture making, line making. You can use really anything to drag across ink once it's wet. I'm going to have a pencil just if I need to put down some earlier lines before I use my masking fluid. And we've got Winsor & Newton pad of 140-pound hot press. And the reason we're using hot press here is because it's got the smoothest surface of any of the watercolor papers. A cold press can be a bit bumpy. A rough is even bumpier than that. And when you're trying to work with ink, especially with a quill, that's another tool that I forgot to mention. If you have a dip quill here, a dip pen, you want a really smooth surface so that you can get uninterrupted lines and really clean details. All right, so with that, we have one other thing that I am going to add. We've got masking fluid, which you'll see here. And quick disclaimer, this is a latex-based masking fluid. So if you have a latex allergy, beware of that. And to work with the masking fluid, we're going to have a little solution here that you can make with 50% dish soap and 50% water. And we're just going to use that to protect our brush before we put it in the masking fluid, because again, it is very, very strong stuff once it dries, and it can separate the bristles of your brush. So that's our materials. Let's get right into making something. So I'm going to open up my pad here. And the benefit of a pad of watercolor paper is you don't need to tape it down. It's glued around all of the edges here. So the page that's on top is the page that is fixed in place. So it will, it'll wrinkle when it's wet, but once it dries, it will dry perfectly flat again, as if you had perfectly taped it. And that's a really nice benefit if you don't want to have to tape. I do have some taped work here I'll be working on as well. And the taping doesn't need to be perfect, but this is also something I would suggest whenever you're working on watercolor paper. You can see a bit of the masking fluid that's been applied here. I'll show you more of that in a minute. So we have our watercolor pad here. And I've already laid down some masking fluid. And the reason I did that earlier is because you need to let your masking fluid dry 100% before you put any paint on top of it. If the masking fluid is still wet and you put ink into it, it will mix and it will do strange things with the inks that you might not intend. So in order to protect your surface, make sure that the masking fluid has dried fully. So let's get into using a bit of the masking fluid as well. And as I talk, we'll let that section dry. So over here, you'll see I've got a mix of fluorescent red and bismuth yellow that I think is really quite nice. It's really vibrant. But I kept it a little bit light because I do want to have a darker layer over this. And you'll see I've got some lines here from the forks, from the fork line making that I was doing. And I've let this dry. And what you can do with masking fluid is you can mask color that is already down. So this is dry ink. I can put masking fluid on this and it will protect the color here that I mask. And in that way, you can continue to layer over and over and over and make sure that you're protecting the pieces that you like. So let's use some of that masking fluid. I'm going to put some out in a little dish here. And it comes out as a slightly off-white, almost an eggshell white color. And it's really very low viscosity. It's pretty fluid. Ooh, that's a lot of brightness there. It almost moves like an ink. It's got that level of viscosity. And so I'm going to put that next to my page, and I'm going to take this brush that I don't care very much about. I'm going to dip that into my dish soap solution and get it nice and wet. I'll wipe off the excess. And again, we're just protecting the bristles here so that we don't end up with a brush that can't be used for anything because it's been covered in latex. I'll dab off just a bit of the excess, and then I'm going to dip this brush into the masking fluid and get a good amount on there. You want to make sure that you've got a pretty thick application here. Not so thick that you've got bumps, but not so thin that it's a little bit, it's missing the page. You want to make sure you've got an even coverage. So I'm going to take that and I'm just going to make some nice lines, just little squiggles here. Let me hold it up so you can see. We're just going to have fun with it. We're just making art for art's sake here. Something that just feels nice to paint. And remember, everything that's under this masking fluid is going to be protected. So if there's a part of your art that you're working on and you think, I really like this part, I don't want it to get paint over it, but I want to layer, you can protect it. You can just cover it now. So I really like these lines over here. Maybe I'll just cover those. I'll paint right over. It doesn't look like it's masking right now. That's because it is still wet. And I'm just going to let that dry. So I've got that there. I'm done with my masking fluid, so I'm going to immediately rinse my brush back in this solution first, and then I'm going to rinse it in regular water just to be thorough. I have kind of a plastic cup that I've got a lot of paint on over the years. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. And I'll make sure that my brush does not have any masking fluid left. And that's how you protect your brush. You'll see that I've got this little brush here on the side that I do quite like. It's a flat, probably flat number 6. And it continues to work really well. The bristles are perfectly usable, and that's because I continue to rinse it really well. I've been using it with the masking fluid, and it still works. So you can absolutely use masking fluid and not ruin your brushes. It's just something that people run into if they're not expecting it, and I just want you to be able to expect it and account for it. So we're letting this masking fluid dry here. Over here, we have some already dry masking fluid, so I'm going to get in there with color and just start to lay it down. And that's one of the favorite things that I will do with an ink, an acrylic ink, is it makes a really nice, smooth bottom layer. So if you're doing, let's say, an underpainting, you could be underpainting for watercolor, you could be underpainting for something else. If you lay down an ink layer, it'll be really smooth and even. You won't have any texture that you have to fight against later on. You can just treat it almost like a colored paper. So I'm just going to take some bismuth yellow, and I think I'll take some of the turquoise deep. Ooh, hey, that's quite the, there we go. That's right. All right, turquoise deep. Just a little of that. It's very strong. Your bluer colors will definitely overpower your yellows. So whenever you're working with a really dark, especially dark value color, know that it can overpower your lighter value colors, your brighter colors. And I think I will also take some Perylene Maroon. Shake that up a little bit. And I'm just going to mix that on the edges here, some on the side with the turquoise deep, and some on the side with the bismuth yellow. And then I'm going to take my number 6 round brush right here. It's just a simple round brush, and I'm going to spread these colors together. And look at how evenly that applies, how smoothly that applies. And I'm just going to kind of play with it. It doesn't have to be perfect. I can rinse the brush if I want to take some other colors here. So for instance, if I don't want the bismuth yellow to mix with these other colors yet, I'll rinse my brush to prevent them from overlapping. And I get some really strong washes here. It almost is like working with a watercolor. But there's one really major benefit of working with an acrylic ink that is, I prefer to working with a watercolor, that once this dries, once these inks here dry, they become waterproof. They will not reactivate. So you can put this layer down and you'll know it will continue to look exactly the way it looks. If you put another layer on here, you can re-wet it and it will never move. And if any of you have worked with watercolor before, you'll know that if you go to put a second layer of watercolors down on top of an initial watercolor layer, sometimes your inks start to get muddy. You start to get pickup from your layer before, and it might even get erased. And that can be really frustrating and not something you have to deal with when you're using an acrylic ink. Acrylics, and this is true for all of the Liquitex line, once they dry, they're there. They're fixed. They're not going to move. They're also light fast, and that's a really big difference that you'll find with inks that are pigment based. They're very, very light fast. So all of these inks here, except for the fluorescent, and I'll tell you about that in a second, are light fast. Whereas, oh my goodness, wow, are light fast. And a dye-based ink, which is pretty standard for inks in the regular ink industry dealing with quills, things like that, are typically dye-based, and a dye-based color is not light fast. It will fade very quickly, sometimes even in the course of months, especially if you expose it to sunlight. And this is also true for watercolors. I'm sure some of you have dealt with watercolors before and know that if you leave them in a really bright area, maybe you hang them on your wall on the south-facing window, your reds will start to fade first, and then your yellows, and eventually your greens and blues too will start to dull over time. And that's not something you have to worry about when you've got a pigment-based color. And now let me tell you a bit about what I just mentioned, that fluorescents are the only Liquitex inks that are not rated for light fastness. And you'll see that on the side of the bottle here. We have the light fastnesses on the labels. But this is true for all fluorescent colors, not just Liquitex's. The nature of the vibrancy of a fluorescent color necessitates a dye base. And so there is no fluorescent color you can get that is light fast. That's just something to know. If you make a piece with really bright fluorescent colors, just keep it out of bright light and know that over time it will eventually fade. And that's just because that's how fluorescents are made. But for every other color we've got here, they're pigment based and they will be light fast. They will hold up against the onslaught of UV radiation that the sun gives us. And they will continue to look just as vibrant as when you put them down. I'm going to put down some other colors here. And this is more of a splatter effect that I've got going in the middle. And again, I've already put this down so that it could dry, but I've just taken this brush that I've got, this muddy brush, and I can do a little of that on this piece over here. And I'm going to just, again, get it soapy so that it's protected. And then I'll dip it back into the masking fluid, which is over here. And it is, yep, still usable, still fluid. And I'm just going to flick my brush. And in doing that, I'm getting little bubbles of masking fluid, which are going to protect little circles wherever they land. And it's a little hard to see. They're kind of small, but they're there. And you'll see them when I put down this next layer here. And that's really a lot of fun for making, let's say, a starry night. And I've got some pieces over here that I've already made using masking fluid. So for instance, you can make this type of effect, which is a moon with stars, and it's the same thing. I drew a circle here in masking fluid, and then I just speckled masking fluid around that area. I had put down a layer first, an initial layer of bismuth yellow and turquoise deep, let it dry, threw down some masking fluid, and then put a really dark layer on top with the turquoise deep. And this is the result you get. Once you remove the masking fluid, you get a really strong effect of color layering, edge control, and just some really nice playful speckles. You can do a lot with masking fluid, and I've done a little bit more here as well. We've got some stars, some little speckles. This is the Perylene red mixed with Rubine red over a layer of bismuth yellow and Rubine red. So there's really a lot of variety you can get. You can do a lot with inks and masking fluid. You can do everything that you could do with watercolor. You can do everything that you could do with ink, traditional ink. And I really like that versatility. And I think versatility is really the word to use here, because in addition to using inks as inks, you can mix them with any of the other Liquitex products. So for instance, if you wanted to work with a spray, oh goodness, what is the word? If you wanted to spray the inks, you airbrush them. You can put them with the airbrush medium that we have, put them in an airbrush machine, and you can airbrush with the inks. You can also mix them with a matte gel, and they become thicker and have a matte finish. On their own, they have a satin finish. You can mix them with any other color. I could mix them with the titanium white gouache, acrylic gouache here, to get a really more opaque color. But I'm gonna keep painting so that we can see how really strong and vibrant these colors are. And I think that's one of the other noteworthy characteristics of the Liquitex inks, that they have the highest pigment load, and they're the most vibrant of the colors that Liquitex offers because of that high pigment load. So if I were to take, let's say, the Rubine red here, which is a really, really beautiful red, and just drop it onto my page, you'll see that even just 3 drops is able to get a really gorgeous purpley color here. It's it's almost a fluorescent in its own way, but it is light fast. It's not a fluorescent color. It's just so vibrant that it harkens to the fluorescence that you might see. And let's mix that with a little bit of the bismuth yellow again to see if we can get a bit of an orange. And then at the top here, let's see if we can get a wash with the Perylene maroon. And you can mix any of the colors together. It all depends on what effect you're looking for. Do you want something bright and airy? Or do you want something darker and moodier? It is October, it's Halloween season. Are we maybe getting spooky colors involved? And we'll mix the Perylene up here. Look at how much warmer that red is. It almost is giving a bit of a fire effect in the gradient that I've got coming that I really quite like. And I'll hold that up for you all to see it a little bit better. Got really strong colors here with just a few drops of the inks. And I've had these inks for a while now, and I'm nowhere near using them up. Because of that high pigment load, I can use very little, and it will go a very long way. So they last a really, really long time. And that is true, especially because I always put the lid on. Oh my goodness, they're so shiny, but they're throwing the light off. Always put the lid back on when you're done using it, and that will help keep the longevity of your inks. If you leave the lids off, and this is true for really any paint that you work with, you're exposing it to the air, and the result of that might be your ink drying out. So just make sure to put the lid on, whether it's an ink, a gouache, a soft body, a heavy body, the bio base, just always put the lid back on. The masking fluid, it's just like working with glue in a bottle. If you leave the lid off of your glue, it will dry out. And we don't want that. We want it to last a good long time. So now I'm going to take my number 6 brush here, my round brush, and I'm going to start doing some line making. And we're moving now in the direction of Inktober. We're moving in the direction of really fine line work, but we're working from big clean washes to kind of smoother gradations. So I'm going to grab the iridescent rich copper because it's a really gorgeous metallic.
Hey, Abigail, we have a question in the chat.
Yeah, go for it.
Yep, so Pina wants to know what was in the mixture to dip your brush in before using masking fluid?
Yes. That here is a solution that is 50% dish soap, and it can be any dish soap, and 50% water. And it doesn't have to be exact. You just want enough soap and enough liquidity that you can really rinse the brush well. And that's all. That just helps keep your brush clean and rinsable in a way that won't have it dry out over time. You're very welcome.
Great. And we have one more question as well.
Yeah, go for it.
Yep. So we would like to know, what is the best surface that is suitable for Liquitex ink?
Oh, well, you can use it on quite a few surfaces. In fact, what I showed you earlier, these over here, these are canvas pad. These are Winsor & Newton canvas pads. So it actually has a bit of a texture to it and a flexibility. It's on a woven fabric that has a primer on it. So it works on that really well if you're just looking for having a good time, doing art for art's sake. If you don't need really fine details, really any surface will work with the inks. I would avoid copy paper, but anything thicker than that will be fine. If you're looking for really high detail quality, if you want really fine lines, that's when I would use a hot press or even a cold press watercolor paper. And the Colart sister company of Liquitex, which is Winsor & Newton, sells watercolor paper, and that's what I'm using here. And it's just a really high quality paper that is archival, it's acid free. And if you're looking to make really nice pieces, really polished final results, I would use that because it just lets you get really clean lines when you're working on essentially a flat surface. And that really is the difference here. If you're working on a woven surface, especially when you're painting, you just can't get a straight line. If the surface is bumpy, you can imagine how hard it is to draw a straight line. If the surface is smooth, it's so much easier. It just comes more naturally. So especially if you're used to drawing like I am, it really matters that you have a smooth surface to work with. So I recommend watercolor paper, but it doesn't have to be. It could be a canvas. You could absolutely do this on, let's say, Liquitex's recycled canvases that we have, which are made from plastic bottles. You could absolutely use an ink and paint it on this surface, especially as an underpainting. That would work really, really well. You could paint it on anything that can handle a fluid medium, a fluid paint. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, so while we're on the ball with these questions, we have a couple more in the chat.
All right, sure.
So Douglas's first question is, do you need to prime the canvas surface before using the ink?
Not at all. Acrylic paints, because they have an acrylic polymer, are kind of self-priming. If you like the texture of a primer, you can certainly go with that. But let's say, for instance, this watercolor paper is unprimed. It's just watercolor paper, and I'm painting directly onto that surface. The canvas pad I used here is primed, and I painted directly onto that. But if I had, let's say, plywood, I could paint directly onto that plywood. If you're worried about archival quality, then I would say go for a primer just for the rigor of having a primer and knowing that it's there. But acrylic, because it creates, when it's dry, a plastic film, it kind of is already protecting the surface itself. If you're going to cover the whole surface in acrylic, you're creating a layer, a protective barrier for that surface. Hope that answers the
Great.
question.
Yeah. And then this question is kind of a two-parter. So the first part is, Dawn dish soap okay?
Yeah, Dawn dish soap is perfectly fine. You just want something that is able to wash Liquitex away, or excuse me, not Liquitex, masking fluid. You want something that is able to rinse a latex, and dish soap, any dish soap, is equipped to do that.
Okay, and then the second part of that question is, does the masking fluid affect the colors, or do you need to remove it after drying?
You do remove it. That is a really good question. It does not affect the colors. What it's doing is drying as if you had applied a really nice sheet of glue, and it's covering the surface of the paper. It's just laying on top of that paper. And as a result, when you paint over it, the pigment that's coming from the paint is touching all of the surface of the paper except what you've covered. And so once your ink is dry, and we'll do that in a second here, once the ink is dry, you can remove the masking fluid and you'll be revealing all of what was underneath that masking fluid. If you had just plain paper, you'll just be seeing the plain paper again, a nice white. Or over here where I painted over the ink, what I'm going to see is going to be that original color that I put down. That's a really good question. It will not affect the color unless, I suppose, if you were to accidentally paint on top of wet masking fluid, I think that would alter the sticking quality of the paint. It wouldn't adhere well to the surface, but you shouldn't be doing that. Unless you're doing experimental work, I'm not going to stop you, but you should let the masking fluid dry fully, and that way you don't have to worry about the interaction of the paint with the masking fluid.
Great. And we have a couple more questions about surfaces.
Yeah, sure.
So we have a question. What do you think about using Yupo paper with acrylic inks?
Oh, that's a really good question. Ooh, you can absolutely use acrylic inks on a Yupo paper. Yupo, because it is a lot less porous than the surfaces that we see here, might allow you to work the ink a bit longer. I've never actually tried working it on Yupo paper, but I can imagine that it would dry if you didn't touch it and let it just sit, but it might be able to move a bit more. It might flow more easily because it's not absorbing into the surface like we're seeing here with watercolor paper. But absolutely, and I think the fun of an acrylic ink is that you can play with it and you can experiment and see if it works. And I assume that it will, but I don't know. I haven't tried it, so I would say go ahead and try it and see what happens.
Okay, and our last question for now is, do you ever use clay boards for acrylic inks?
Oh, interesting. No, I've never used a clay board with acrylic ink. Oh, that's a really good question. Wow, people use some very interesting surfaces in this chat. My goodness. I don't see why you couldn't use it. You might just need to throw down more ink than I'm doing here because of the absorbency. Um, that's very interesting. I've never tried it, but acrylics really will adhere to any surface that you put them on. You could even paint on glass if you wanted to, knowing that if you tried, you could probably peel it off of the surface because glass is so very non-porous that it doesn't adhere very well. You could paint on just about anything with an acrylic and know that it will dry into a plastic and the plastic will stick very well, especially to a porous surface. But the only time I've seen acrylic come off is when I have tried to peel it off of something and it had to be a glass surface that I was peeling off of. Anything else, I've never had trouble with it coming up. The other thing to worry about, to know if you're going to be applying acrylic to surfaces that are a bit stranger or less porous, is if you're watering them down, there is a limit to the amount of water you can add to an acrylic, after which you're just diluting it too far and you dilute the binder. And the binder is what takes a pigment and makes it stick to the page, right? If I just had pure Rubine red powder, that's not going to stick to a surface. It's a powder. So the acrylic polymer is what is turning this into a paint, a fluid thing that sticks to a surface. And because these are water soluble, the solvent is water. If you add too much water here, and you shouldn't go more than 30%, you're diluting the binder so much that it can't bind to itself. The molecules of binder get too far apart and they can't reach each other anymore. Now, there are mediums for spreading and thinning paints. The fluid medium especially is meant for that, so that if you do want to really, really thin your paint, but you still need it to stick like a paint, you can add some of that fluid medium into your ink. So let's say I had Rubine red here, I could add it into a little jar, throw the fluid medium in there, and mix it with a little bit of water. And that would give me that spreadability without losing the binding abilities of a binder. I hope that answers the question. It's a bit of a long answer. Okay, all right. Let me get into discussing, I'll keep painting here, but I'll discuss a little bit now the differences in alcohol ink and an acrylic ink. And I think, did I do that already? I've practiced so many times. I'm thinking I maybe have said this already, but I'll say it again for redundancy's sake, that an acrylic ink is pigment suspended in an acrylic binder. And pigment is light fast. Pigment is fairly large color molecules. They're not too small. Dye is a much finer grind of color. And so what that means is when you paint an acrylic pigment-based paint, it's going to be light fast. And if you use a dye, alcohol ink tends to be dye-based, you're using something that is going to not be light fast. If you put it in the light, it will fade over time. And additionally, a difference is that acrylic is in an acrylic suspension, and alcohol inks are in an alcohol suspension. Alcohol evaporates very quickly and spreads very quickly. So the laying down of a surface is very different. It's pretty easy for me to spread here and get even coverage, whereas an alcohol ink, because it evaporates so quickly, you put it down and you'll get edges. Almost like with a watercolor, if you worked a little too slowly, you would get edges where you put down brush strokes. So if I put down one brush stroke here, even what I've done right here could simulate that, where I've got my ink put down and I've put it down and it's dry. If I now put another layer, the lines from this first wash are going to still be visible because I haven't spread them. So let me just put down more color here and see if I can show you on camera what it looks like when you layer. Ooh, this one's a little too strong, so I think it's going to be a little bit harder to see. But essentially, an alcohol ink is just a little harder to get an even wash with. And you need to work with a really non-porous surface as well with alcohol inks because of that quick drying, that you need to give it as much time as possible to stay wet. And the way to do that is to work on metal or perhaps glass so that it really just has the longest working time that alcohol can have before it evaporates. And acrylics are a lot more forgiving. You could re-wet just a little bit here and continue spreading, and you get a longer working time and a really, again, really nice, even flat surface of color. It's got really good blendability, and I've got a really nice gradient happening here as well, from a darker to a lighter coverage. There we go. And I really do recommend it for initial layers. For undercolors, if you don't like working on a white surface, I would really recommend acrylic inks for putting down that first surface. And again, knowing that once it's down, it's dry. So for instance, if I come over here, I put this down a couple hours ago, and if I were to just get my brush wet here, make sure that it's clean, if I get this wet and try to lift the ink, it doesn't lift, it's dry. It's staying exactly where it was. The lines are staying where I put them. They're not coming up. They are fixed now. They've become waterproof, and I don't have to worry about them going anywhere. Which means now that this is dry, and my masking fluid is pretty dry there, I can take some more ink and layer on top of this initial layer that I've put down. So I'm going to I think I'll take the Rubine red and the Perylene maroon, and I'll just start to drop it on there. And I'll do what I've done before. I'll make it really simple wash that just incorporates a couple colors that play nicely together, that mix really well. And I want these to be a little bit darker than what I've already put down so I can really see the lines that I've masked. I'm just gonna have a little fun with it. It doesn't need to be perfect. I'm just putting color down because I like the look of it. And I'll get into some more detailed work in a second, because you can get really detailed, really polished work with inks, but you don't have to. You don't have to force yourself to be making high quality things every time you paint. And sometimes we need a reminder of that. You don't have to be making an excellent result in order to be making art and enjoying doing it. There's nothing to stop you from buying some ink and just playing with it. You know, what does it matter? If you enjoyed making it, that's all that matters. So now I'm gonna let some of what's here dry, and I'm just gonna remove masking fluid from some pieces that I've got, and I'll show you what I've done in the past here. So again, we've got this piece where I did an initial really light color layer underneath. I masked that. It was a bismuth yellow undercolor. I masked it, and then I put a really deep turquoise layer on top of that, and I removed the masking fluid. I did the same thing here. I did an underlayer of the iridescent rich copper. I let that dry. I masked it, and then I put down some Perylene red. I did some squiggles here, same thing. I had some rich copper. I let it dry. I played with it. I had a lot of fun with the brush. I used this number 6 round here, and I made sure to wash it really well. And I just had fun with it. I did some flourishes. I let that dry, and then I just mixed my deep turquoise and my Perylene Maroon to get almost a black here. And it's a really vibrant black because it's a mix. It's not just a flat black. And I get a really strong contrast here. And I've done a little bit of text as well, and we're about to get into some text and some ink work. And I'll show you, this is the beginning of me removing the masking fluid now that it's dry. So let me just finish removing the masking fluid here. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take an eraser. It could be a finger, but I'll use an eraser for now. I'm just gonna, see, I'm just gonna wipe at it, and you'll see that it creates this film that I can now peel up. Let me get a little closer. And you'll see that I've protected a layer underneath with my masking fluid, and I was able to kind of negatively paint here. I was able to put down what I wanted to keep pale before I put down a really dark layer. And if I just very simply erase the masking fluid, now that it's dry, and it does have to be dry, I have this really cool effect of light on dark. And you can see the shine of a masking fluid. And when it's dry, it has a kind of rubbery consistency and that little bit of sheen so you can tell where it is. And that's so you know where you can erase it from. So for instance, these dots were a little bit harder to get rid of because it's just harder to tell where they are. But if you just rub enough, you'll find what was there, what was masked, and you'll remove it. So we'll just finish it here, removing the masking fluid. Almost done. And you'll see we've got the word behold with a really cool space color in the background. It's a mix of Perylene red, Rubine red, Perylene maroon, Rubine red, and turquoise deep. That was really, really light. And then I masked it and did a really dark coverage on top of that. And it gives you this kind of really dreamy color contrast that I think is really excellent to work with and really kind of exciting to do. It's kind of a reveal. It's almost a party trick to remove the masking fluid and see what was left behind. And I just have a lot of fun using it for that purpose. Let's see. So now I'm going to take the ink that I have and I'm going to start using a dip quill to show you how fine of a line you can get with the ink. You can actually use these inks just like any other ink, knowing that they are light fast and they are permanent once you've put them down. So I'm going to take, I'm going to do turquoise deep because it's such a nice dark color. I think it will show up really well. I'm just going to put some out here that I can dab into so that I can just close this up again. Again, I don't want to leave it with the cap off. And I'm just going to dip my quill and I'm going to start writing. A hole in the ground. And you'll pardon my very bad penmanship, but you can see you can write with it. Get that on camera as if it was a regular ink, and you get really, really fine lines. It'll be upside down. Let's take a look at it here. Really high quality, smooth lines. There, that's a bit better. Bring it a little bit closer for you. There. Lift a hobbit. And I can draw with it as well. I don't just have to write, though I can. I can make a face, let's say. I can just have a lot of fun with it and use it as if I was writing. At this point, it's no different from writing with a regular pen, except that I have a really nice suite of vibrant colors that I can work with. It's Halloween. I could do a jack-o'-lantern. And it works really quickly. It's very intuitive to work with, especially if you've done a lot of ink work before. You can fill in spaces with the quill. You can buy, let's say, Copic markers. You can buy empty Copic markers and fill them with an acrylic ink. And you can write with them as if they came that way, as if you had a Copic that was Liquitex colors. I think that's a lot of fun. You can also use ink as a stamping ink. So if I had a stamp here and I could just stick it in, get it inked up, and I could press and use it as an ink that way. So it really is very much interchangeable with any other ink that you've used and has the benefit of being fully permanent when dry, waterproof, and light fast. And it's just really fun to work with. I really enjoy being able to work with a fine line, and that's part of why I'm using the hot press paper here as well, that it feels like I'm writing on stationery. It feels like a paper meant for writing, even though it is in fact meant for watercolor. It just takes the ink really well and holds it in place. And again, you'll see I can rub it. Ooh, that one's still wet. But any part of it that's dry is not going anywhere. It's fixed in place. And that gives you a lot of versatility. There's a lot you can do with this. And know that you don't have to worry about it moving or fading or anything like that. It just stays the strong, vibrant, clean color that you started with. Any questions on what I've said so far? Let me just clean my brush. Again, I'm making sure to clean everything as I use it to make sure that I don't end up with just gunk in my quill, in my nib, in my brushes. Yeah, go ahead.
We have a couple of questions in here that have been sitting. I was just waiting for a good moment.
Okay, awesome.
So James is asking, could you speak a bit about the contrast between acrylic ink to India ink?
To India ink. Oh, that's an interesting question. India ink, is that a brand? I'm familiar with the India color. Is that tell me more about India ink and I can tell you more about the differences. Do
And
we have any?
can go ahead to another question we have here from
Okay,
our.
yeah, sure.
So is airbrush medium the same as fluid medium?
No, it's not. So fluid medium is designed to not water down a color, but if you want to lower the viscosity, that's what a fluid medium is for. And I can grab some and show you very quickly. But it's meant to help your ink, your pigment spread a little bit further. Whereas an airbrush medium it does the same thing. It lowers the viscosity, but it's doing that to such a point that the pigment will fit through an airbrush. So it's an even lower viscosity designed to be able to spray. So they're subtly different. They're going in the same direction of a lower viscosity, but they're meant for different things. Let me just see if I can find my fluid medium very quickly. Fabric medium, or medium. Let's use we have a lot of mediums. Liquitex has a ton of mediums for having a ton of different effects. So what I've got here is a pouring medium, and it will have a lot of the effects that you might expect from a fluid medium, with the difference that it creates a really thick finish. So if I take a little bit of a medium and put it in a container here, and then I take just a little bit of my ink, I'm going to use the Turquoise Deep, and I just drop a few drops in there. You see I've got the two, there we go, the two mixes, and I'll stir them together. And what I get is a really vibrant color. It's still the Turquoise Deep, but now with the pouring medium mixed in, I get a really fun ability to, let me make sure it's on camera where you can see it, to pour it and get really nice drips, really thick globs of paint. So that if you're looking for that kind of effect, if you're looking for almost a raindrop effect, you can get that. There's a string gel that I could mix in here that lets you get really nice stringy lines. There's iridescent medium if you want to take something that is not an iridescent rich copper, but let's say if you wanted the Rubine red to have a little bit of glimmer to it, you can add the iridescent medium and get that quality, get that sparkle into whichever pigment you choose, which is a really cool effect that you can take any ink and turn it into a higher viscosity. If you really like working with a thicker paint, but you happen to have an ink, you can add a gel to it, and it will give you a soft body consistency. You could even get a heavy body consistency, which is closer to the thickness of an oil paint, for instance. There's even a modeling paste, which is really very dense, and I've used that before, and it gives you these really nice impasto strokes, and you can use a palette knife and get really deep in there. So the benefit of an acrylic ink is that you've got such a high pigment load that you can use just a little bit and mix it in with other mediums, and you'll get that strong color, and you can alter the characteristics that are inherent to an ink. You can turn it into other paint sources, other paint types. So you don't have to buy, let's say you have Perylene Maroon ink and you want a soft body. You don't have to buy the soft body in Perylene Maroon. You can just buy a thickening gel and add your existing color to it, and you can, it's almost like having a whole suite of inks and pigments and soft bodies that you can vary with your own preferences. So if you want something slightly thicker but not quite a soft body, you can simulate that viscosity using the mediums that we have. And all of the acrylic mediums, fluids, effects, and paints are all cross-compatible. Every Liquitex product that you buy is able to mix with other Liquitex products. And that's really nice that you just don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about the fact that one thing you have might not mix with the other. They will always mix together. You don't have to worry about it. And that's really nice to know.
Okay, great. So while we're on the topics of mediums, Douglas was asking, could you use a slow dry medium with acrylic inks to extend the dry time even further?
Yeah, absolutely. You can absolutely use a slow drying medium, throw it in here. The fluid medium has a similar effect to that, although slow dry is built even better for that purpose. That if you add it into an ink or soft body or heavy body, if you add it into any of the paints, they will simply be workable longer. That's exactly what it's for. That's a great question. Yes. Any other questions?
Yes. So from Liz, we have a question about the difference between acrylic gouache and acrylic ink and if they could be used together.
Oh yeah. Oh, they can absolutely be used together. And in fact, let me see. I have some gouache right here, titanium white, and I can mix them together right now. The difference, there are a couple differences. So gouache is going to be, the acrylic gouache is going to be a little bit thicker. It's going to be a slightly higher viscosity. So you'll see I dab it out there and it does hold its shape. Ooh, stuck my finger in it. You'll see we've got a kind of glob here where the ink is fluid like a liquid. The gouache is holding body a little bit better. It also has a matte finish. The acrylic gouaches have a matte finish by nature. Acrylic inks have a satin finish. But if you want to change that, there are matte gels you can add, so you can make the inks matte. There are oh my gosh, my words are failing me. Oh, there are gloss mediums as well that you can add to take a satin ink and turn it into a glossy finish. And you can mix them together just as you could mix a gouache with a heavy body or a bio-based or an ink with a bio-based. So you can take your gouache and mix it with that ink and get a really nice in-between color. And this, because you've mixed a little bit of a low viscosity ink with a higher viscosity gouache, will have a kind of medium viscosity here. So I can take that, and it's going to be more opaque because I'm using titanium white, and I can paint it right on top. Let's put it in here. And I can get some really cool lines that go on opaquely on top of what I've already got. And again, because the layer beneath here is dry, I don't have to worry about it coming up. So I can just layer right on top without worrying, without feeling like I'm going to potentially ruin all the work I've already put in. I can just get really playful with it and not worry about things moving on me and having effects that I don't want. It's all just going to stay right where I put it. There we go. So yeah, that's your mix of gouache and ink right there. You can mix any of the acrylic paints together. You can mix bio-based into here. You can mix all three. You can mix all 6 types of paints. There's really no limit to what you want to mix here. There's nothing you can do to break them. You will continue to mix. If you make something a little too viscous, you can just add a little more fluid medium to it. If it's not viscous enough, you can add a little more of a body medium to it. You can always adjust and play, and it will continue to stick together. There's nothing here that is incompatible. Everything is compatible within the Liquitex range. Great question. Any
Okay,
other questions? Yeah,
we
go
have a
for it.
couple more. Just let us know if you want to move on or if you're good to keep
No, I'm
asking.
happy. I'm happy to take some questions while I continue erasing some of the dried masking fluid. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, cool. So from Elaine, we have a question. Could you summarize the materials used for resist effects with the inks?
Oh yeah. So there's really only one key medium here that we're using to resist, and that's the masking fluid, the Liquitex masking fluid here, which is latex based. And that's what you're seeing me erase right now. By getting close here, you'll see that there are little beads of masking fluid, and if I just rub my finger over them because they're dry already, they'll just come right up. And the thing that I'm using to protect my brushes is a little solution here that is 50% dish soap and 50% water. And if I'm putting down the masking fluid, and I've already done that so far, so I'm not going to do it now, I would mix my brush into the soap mixture, remove any of the excess, and then I would dip my brush into the masking fluid and lay it down. And I want to make sure I've got a thick enough layer that it really covers the surface that I'm trying to protect, but not so thick that it's globbed on there. I can get just a kind of medium, as if you're using it like a paint, is how I would describe it. And that's it. That's all it takes is just the masking fluid, a brush that you are okay if you maybe ruin, but they don't get ruined unless you forget about them. So for instance, this brush here, I've used quite a bit with masking fluid, and it still works quite well. It's always been an old brush like this. And you can also use nicer brushes that have much finer edges, and it continues to work very well because I rinse it immediately after using it. And that's really the only caveat here. Make sure that once you've put down your masking fluid, you immediately take your brush and rinse it out, and do that really, really thoroughly. And that's all there is to it. All right, other questions, thoughts?
Yes. So we have someone asking, what type of fountain pen do you suggest for writing that's compatible with these inks?
You can use anything, any fountain pen, any nib. Uh, you can absolutely use these. You can also use a technical pen if you've got one that's refillable and has a refillable cartridge. You can fill that with Liquitex inks as well. So you can use, I have a really nice wide Gothic type nib that you could fill with the Rubine red, for instance, and get a really nice thick line. I'm just using the nib that happens to be on hand here, which is a C5. But really anything will work. I have a glass pen that I use as well, works just as fine. Any kind of tool, it doesn't even have to be a brush. If I take a fork here and rub it through, now that's dried a little bit. Let me use something that's a little bit wetter. I can make lines with just about anything, so long as it can pick up the ink and the ink is still fluid. And I can get really interesting textures. And I actually really like using the fork, which seems a bit silly, but there's something about parallel shape making that I think is really quite nice and subtle. And it saves you a bit of time. You don't have to try to write the same line 4 times. You can just take a fork and drag it around and get the same result. That was a good question. Yeah, a pipette. Yeah, a pipette is also a fantastic idea. They're really, really nice fluid colors. So you can pick them up as if they were any other liquid that you might paint with. So a pipette is really good for it. Any brush really. And again, as long as you're just cleaning them out, your brushes will be fine. You could even stick your finger in if you wanted to and drag it around if you enjoy painting with your hands. There's nothing wrong with that. Stamp making, if you had a stamp, like if I carved into this eraser, it's a really good way to make a quick stamp. I could dip it into the ink and apply it as if I had used a stamp pad. And in that way, you can mix your own stamp colors. So if I wanted to get a really deep purple for printmaking for stamps, I could use Rubine Red and Turquoise Deep, mix them together in a little dish, and I could just make a ton of stamps using those inks that way. There's really a lot of versatility here. If you think you can do it, chances are you can probably do it, if that answers that question. And you'll see how easily the masking fluid comes up when you just erase it and make sure that everything else is dry. Any other questions so far?
Yes. So before we move on to our next question, we have someone mentioning using a needle tip. Also very good.
Oh, that's a great idea. Oh, I've never thought of that. Yeah, if you wanted really, really fine lines, yeah, absolutely. If you took a needle and just dragged it through the ink, that's a really good suggestion. I never thought of that. Sometimes it's hard to get a really fine line. Brushes can only get so fine. And I'm sure we've all struggled with that at some point or another, trying to get such a fine line that you can't use a brush for it. Uh, that would probably be the best application I could think for using a needle for. Because even a really fine quill nib here has a limit. It has a limit to how fine it can get. And a needle is probably the sharpest thing that you could work with. That's a really good suggestion.
Okay, so another question we have here is how do you create value scale with inks?
Oh, that's a really good question. Oh, we can do that right now, actually. Let's take this wider brush that I've got. Make sure it's clean. And let's just make a gradient. Let's make a gradient, and I'm going to do it. I'm actually going to switch pages. I'm going to let this continue to dry for now. And I've got some other things that are masked out and ready to prepare that I could start getting into. And over here, I've got a little bit of a splatter effect that you might be able to see. You can see a bit of a hint of the masking fluid, the shine of it. And what I'm going to do to answer this question is I'm going to do a gradient with Perylene Maroon. And I'm going to go from a really dark value, the darkest that Perylene can do, and I'm going to move it into a really light value. And what I would do with that is I would just use water, frankly, to get that done because I'm not going to use too much. So I'm just going to put some down, some ink, and you can see this is a tea mug cozy that I use. So it's got some text in there, but I'm just going to take it. I'm going to get a lot in my brush here. I'm going to put down a really thick, I'm going to put more out, in fact. Make sure I have enough ink out. I'm going to put a really thick application, as thick as you can get with ink on the left side, and I'm going to drag it. And then I'm going to hit the middle, and I'm just going to add a little bit of water, not too much. And you can see already I've lowered in value here just by thinning it a little bit. And I'm going to rinse out my brush a little bit more. So I've got only just a little bit of water left. And I'm going to continue dragging. And then if I really, really want a light effect on the side here, I'm going to do something that I actually quite like a lot, which is I'm just going to take a paper towel, a little bit of a napkin, something dry, and I'm going to dab up some of that ink. I'm just going to do that until I have a fairly even gradient here. And I find that's the best way to get a really light finish. If you just remove the ink, if you lift it, it's stained a little bit because you put it down, but not so much that you can't pull it up again. So if you drop your ink, for instance, if you spill it in a place you didn't want it, you always have a little bit of time to make corrections. And it won't be perfect. You can't get back down to the white unless I've masked it. But I can get a really nice gradient that way. And then once that dries, if I want it to be even darker, I would go and give a second layer, especially on this side. And I would just make that gradient a few more times once it's dry between each layer. And that would build up the darkness on this side, and I would leave that lightness on this side. That's a really good question. You can get really, really smooth gradients with an ink in the same way that you could with a watercolor. Again, knowing that it will dry and be permanent and fixed into place, which is really nice that you don't have to worry about it moving around once you've put a second layer on there. And now that I put this layer down, you can see where the masking fluid is. So you can paint right over it. And it will look a little like it's grabbed color, but the color is on top of the masking fluid. So once this layer is dry and I start to remove the masking fluid, I'll be left with just that really nice white of the paper that I started with. So there's a lot of flexibility there, and you do have the option to make smooth gradients, to make really even colors, or like I have here, to get really interesting mixes of colors that blend a little bit, but don't necessarily blend fully. So you can show all the different colors interacting with one another in really exciting ways. Any other questions?
Yes, so we're actually going to circle back to mediums.
Okay.
So we have a question here. If a person wants to do an impasto texture, but tint it in a color using this acrylic ink, can this be done or would it have to be separate?
Oh, no, you can absolutely do that with an ink. In fact, I have, let me find my modeling. There it is, modeling paste. Yes, so we have a flexible modeling paste. And there's a couple other texturing gels and pastes that exist, but this is the thickest one that we have. And I really, really like working with this one because it is incredibly thick. It's got the consistency of, gosh, how thicker than mayonnaise, I would say, is how I would describe that. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure my brush is clean. Actually, you know what? I'm going to grab a palette knife here so it doesn't cake up my brush. And I'm just going to take a scoop of that and see how thick that is. I can hold it upside down. It's not coming off. It is very much stuck on there. It's very, very thick. I'm going to close this immediately. Again, this is how I make sure that my mediums last a long time. I always put the lid right back on. And I'm going to take this and put it into my ink and just mix it around. And there was not a lot of ink in here, and already I've got a really strong tint of that Perylene Maroon, which gives me a really lovely rosy pink. It's almost a kind of blush color. And I just mix that around a bunch until I've got a really even spread. Ooh. And you see I've got a colorful, colorful paste there, and I'm just going to lay that. Let's put it over here on top of what I've put down. And I can just brush it on there with my palette knife. And I get these really thick lines, a really strong impasto that, let me see if I can tip it. So yeah, you can see how thickly layered that is. You get a really nice, there you go. Really nice consistency that feels a lot like an oil paint. A really thick application of oil is kind of the effect that you can get with a modeling paste. And you can spread it thinly too. If I wanted, I could just brush really smoothly with the palette knife. And even then, I'm still getting some pretty nice ridges, which I will attempt to show you. Ooh, it's always a little tricky to get the visibility. But all this to say, you can absolutely get some really nice impastos, and you can even make really cool textures. So if I take my fork, my favorite little plastic fork here, and I drag it through the modeling paste mixture that I've got, I get this really cool texturing that's really bold and thick, and that will dry and continue to maintain those edges. So I'll have a really nice thick texture that I can then layer on top of. I could dry brush onto that. I could do a lot with it, and I can get a really thick, a really vibrant color here too. If I just add a little bit more ink, it will continue to be thick, but I can get a much richer color like that. You can already see I'm a lot closer to that deep Perylene Maroon that I get from the bottle. And even then, it's still pretty thick. So I can take that. It's a little bit thinner. I've thinned it with the ink, but it's still thick enough that if I lay it down, oh, I really like this texturing. If I lay it down, I can run my fork through it and get that really cool texture in a way that kind of blends with my background. Let's see, it's right here. Let's turn around that way, maybe. There we go. Yes, so you can see right there, we get some really nice texture. That's a really good question. I really do like texture and leaving the texture in paint. And you'll want a palette knife for that, because if you go straight in with the brush here, the brush will eat up a lot of the mixture that you've made because of how thick it is. But a palette knife is really great for laying down thick paint with an impasto. And you can either use this as your final brush, you can use your palette knife to make really nice texture, or you can come in with a fork or really anything, a needle, perhaps sewing needle, if you've got another spare needle. And you can do a lot with that. So there's really a lot of versatility here. There's a string gel medium, and I could mix that with the inks and get a really interesting line quality that way. You can almost draw with it. There is a lot you can do, and any of the inks that you have or that you buy, you can mix with any of the mediums, any of the fluids, any of the gels, the effects. Everything within the Liquitex range works with one another. And so there's a lot of flexibility. You can't go wrong. You can't break the inks. They will always work with one another. They will work with the mediums. There's nothing you can do that is wrong. They're meant to be experimental. You're meant to be able to take whatever you have and mix them together and try something new. And that's really fun. That's really exciting to know that whatever you've done is not a mistake. It's just a new attempt at something, and you're not going to have your piece fall apart because of it. You'll have something really cool that is light, fast, and permanent that you will have made all by yourself. And I think that's a lot of the fun of working with an acrylic. Really good question. Any other questions? See one coming in. Can you mix the inks with water? Oh, absolutely. Let's take a look at that one. Can you mix the inks with water before it loses the intensity? Before it loses its intensity? Well, the inks won't lose their intensity, but if you're asking if you can add water to the inks, you absolutely can. And let me do that here. I'm just going to clean off my dish to make sure I'm not mixing too many colors. And they're still wet, so I had this out for maybe 30 minutes or so, and it's still workable. Some of this is masking fluid, and you'll see it comes right out because it has dried. You can mix water into the inks. Again, you don't want to go above 30% or you'll start to spread the binder out too much in a way that it won't be able to bind very well. But if you're working on watercolor paper, for instance, because it's so porous, the ink is not gonna come off. You can water that down to a degree and not worry about it coming off on a paper, on a porous surface. So let me add, I think we'll add a little bit of Rubine red. Just a little there, and some water, and we'll just see how that looks. Now my water is a little bit muddy at the moment, but that should be okay. And you can see a really nice mix here and still be really vibrant. This really nice magenta color almost. And we can use that to fill in, let's fill in this square here, and we'll see what I've left. I'll add a little more water. What secrets I've left in masking fluid for us to unveil. And this is, again, a piece of watercolor, 140-pound Winsor Newton watercolor paper that I prepared earlier with masking fluid so that it could be dry. So this whole page is a lot more detailed. The page I was working on earlier is kind of, looser textural work. And this one is to demonstrate a little bit more clearly the precision that you can get with inks, if that's what you're interested in. If you're looking to do calligraphy, for instance, masking fluid can even be used to make text, just as inks can be used to make text. So let's say I've got that nice wash there. You can see the bit of text that I've put down, and I'll let that dry before I pull it off, but it says test. It was a test piece. And I've got a little bit of an H happening here and a sort of Gothic font. And I've just got some strokes of masking fluid. And whenever this is dry, we'll peel it off and we'll see how that ends up looking. But this is what it looks like when you mix your ink with a little bit of water. You still get a really vibrant color. It's just slightly less vibrant than if you went in with 100% ink. You get just a slightly toned down color, which is maybe something you're looking for. Maybe you want a little bit more of a neutral background so that you can add vibrancy on top of that. And if I wanted to now take this just pure Rubine red and add it in, I can still get a really nice wash on top. I can layer these colors, and I'll do a little bit more of that just to get a really strong contrast. So when I take the masking fluid off, we can see really clearly what is left behind. Really clean edges. I do emphasize using contrast. If you're going to use masking fluid and you want really obvious differences in value, you want to make sure that you're using something a lot darker than what you've masked. If you're working on white paper, if you're working on black paper, you'll do the opposite. If you had a black page or maybe a gray page, then what you're protecting is a darker value. And in that case, you're going to want a much higher value to get that contrast. Let's just throw it down a little bit darker here. This is a really gorgeous color. It reads almost like if you concentrated raspberry juice. That's kind of the look here. Maybe raspberry and cranberry together is how I would describe the Rubine red. It's really nice, lively color. It feels verdant and vibrant and like something that is picked straight from the garden, perhaps. There we go. So we got a really nice dark wash here. And when I go to take that masking fluid off, in a minute, once it's dry, I'll get a really strong contrast. Do I have any other questions?
Yes. So we have a question here. Do you always need to use a varnish to preserve your art? And also, do you also need to varnish it when it's totally dry? And what varnishes would you recommend?
Oh, wow. So you definitely don't need to varnish. In fact, the only times that I tend to varnish would be when I'm working with oils. As for acrylic paints, you don't need to varnish. Acrylics, when they dry, they are a plastic film. They're a polymer. And so already you can imagine plastic is something that lingers, that does not wear down. So it's pretty robust. The reason you would use a varnish is to protect it. If you want it to be really museum quality, archival quality, you could we have a couple different varnishes. One of them is permanent varnish and one of them is a removable varnish. What you would do in that case is you can layer the varnishes. So I would put a permanent varnish down first. And what that does is just put a protective layer on top of your piece so that nothing can ever stain it or ruin it. If someone splashed coffee on the varnish, it wouldn't affect the pigment underneath. You've got a protective barrier there. Once you've put your permanent varnish down, you leave that, let it dry, and then you can put a removable varnish. And now you're thinking, why would I have a removable varnish? A removable varnish is so that over the years, when perhaps, the particles in the air start to build up on your piece, maybe there's dust, maybe the piece is over a fireplace and it gets a little bit of soot. You want to be able to remove that layer of varnish, which has captured the pigments from the air, the kind of impurities in the air. Remove that, and when you've removed it, you're back down to your permanent varnish layer. Then you can reapply another removable layer of varnish, and you've got another layer of protection. So it gives you two layers of protection there, one that can be essentially washed off and then reapplied. And the other reason you would add a varnish is it makes a really even sheen on the top of what you're working with. And you can there's a matte varnish, there's a satin varnish, and there's also a gloss varnish. So if you're looking for a really consistent shine, maybe you've applied different inks and gouaches here, and maybe some of it is matte and some of it is satin. By putting a varnish on top, you're giving it one consistent sheen so that when you walk past the piece, you're not distracted by different sheens to it. It's all got one shine, glossy sheen, or maybe it's got a matte sheen, or maybe a satin sheen. It just gives a little bit more of an even finish, and it darkens the colors, especially if you've got a gloss medium. If you've been to a museum of contemporary art, a lot of the pieces will have gloss varnish on it, and the darks will appear a lot darker. It almost gives the painting the sensation of being wet still, which is really, really nice if you want really strong value contrast. If you want to see dark darks next to light lights, that is the real benefit of a varnish, and is definitely something you'll see more in oil paints, but you can do it in acrylic. You don't need to. I don't know of anyone varnishing watercolors. It's possible that you could if you really wanted to protect the surface, but watercolors just tend to be framed behind glass as another way to be protecting that surface there. So you don't need to be varnishing anything. It's more of a style preference, and the the approach to a real piece that can hold up over time and has a real sense of longevity. But for little pieces like this, little test pieces, I wouldn't worry about it. You don't need to. If you want to test varnish, you really do need to make sure that you've got clean air to be doing it. And that sounds a bit silly, but if you've got a lot of pollen in the air or a lot of dust in the air, when you lay down your varnish, that can get trapped in the varnish, and it will be a little bit visible. You might have the sensation of bumps in your varnish, which you don't want. So if you're going to varnish, you want to make sure to do it in maybe even an empty closet, or what I've been told in the past is you can run your shower for a couple minutes and the moisture in the air will capture all of the dust particles and drop them to the ground. Photographers will use this when they're developing film to have a clean airspace, and you can do that as well in order to varnish. So there's a lot that can go wrong when you're varnishing. So if you haven't varnished before, I recommend testing your varnishing out on something that you care a little less about if you do want to go to the effort of doing a varnish layer. I hope that answers the question. There's a lot to go into with varnish, if anyone is interested. It's a it's kind of its own discipline, in fact, to get a good layer of varnish down. Very good question. Anything else?
So a couple more here.
Awesome.
So David has
Mhm.
said, I find that I have to mix a lot of the regular Liquitex acrylic with the ink for it to stick. And when I sprinkle the ink, it will not adhere on top of another color on the canvas. What do you think?
That's very interesting. Sprinkle the ink. I would like to hear more about that because I have layered with inks before on top of other paints, and I haven't had any issues with it. I would make sure that the layers are dry before you do that. Um, yeah, I've never had any problems with that. I would wonder what the surface was. If you could tell me a little bit more about what you were trying to layer on top of, I could answer a bit more specifically. But it should and has for me stuck on top of other layers. I've worked with it on top of heavy body, on top of gouache. Gouache, because it has a matte finish, has a bit more of a porous surface. That one is especially good for layering on top of. But I've never had an issue with it, so I would be very interested to hear more about that. It's a very good question. Other questions, or maybe more details on that question, perhaps? You can see a bit of what I've got underneath there in the masking fluid.
While we wait for David to provide a bit more information in the chat, we can move on to the next question.
Okay.
So, can you mix the inks with water before it loses its intensity?
I answered that one earlier, and the answer is I don't know what you mean by losing intensity, because the ink will not lose its intensity, but you can add water to the ink before it dries and thin it that way. So I did that earlier. That was this wash that we had here. I add a little bit of water to that into the ink, and I was able to get a really even wash that way. You can water down inks. I would say don't water it down more than 30%. If you're going to water it even more than that, or if you want it to be even thinner than that of lower viscosity, I would use the fluid medium that we have, and that would help you lower even the pigment load is what you're doing there, that you're spreading the pigment load out while also adding a binder back in so that you don't lose the adhesion that you get from the binder, from the acrylic polymer. That's a good question. I'll just jump back over to our original sheet, which is certainly dry, and I'll remove more of that masking fluid so we can see how that looks. But hit me with more questions if there are any.
Yep. So David has followed up about his previous
Okay.
question.
Mhm.
So he has said, I only used canvas and the paint under it was dry. The varnish can even dissolve the dry ink too.
The varnish dissolved the dry ink. The varnish dissolved the dry ink? That's very strange. I haven't heard of that happening before. I wonder if the varnish had a solvent in it. I don't know why that would have happened. Acrylics, once they're dry, are fixed in place. So I wonder, was it maybe not an acrylic underlayer? Was it perhaps a watercolor underlayer? In which case, maybe it could have reactivated when it was wet. If you, like any of what I've got here, these really thin ink layers, if I were to let them dry fully, and they should be about dry, I would expect to be able to varnish right on top of these without any of the ink flowing at all. So I would be pretty surprised to hear that there was a problem with the staying power, because once it is dry, it is very dry. So maybe also you mentioned that it was fully dry, so I don't know. I don't know why that would have been. I can't think of a reason for that. Maybe the varnish was very old. Um, but I've never had a problem with adding a varnish on top of a dry layer or adding an ink on top of a dry layer of another paint. That's very interesting. I would like to hear more about that because I'm sure we can come up with a solution to whatever that is. Any other questions?
Yes. So the gel medium, can you
Mhm.
put in a spare bottle to make lines?
Absolutely. Yeah, I like to have, typically I'll have a couple of these empty little jars out. If you have a bottle with a lid or jar with a lid, that will help you keep that fluid workable longer. But for instance, if I wanted to make a mixture here with the string gel, I could take a little jar, or these have plastic lids. I could take one of these, mix my ink and string gel into it, and put a lid on it. And that would just keep that wet and workable for me. And whenever I needed to make a line, I could take it out, dab my brush into it, and just lay down some of that color and put it back up. So you can pre-mix what you've got here. And that's actually one of the benefits of the containers that we've got here, that once you do use up all of your ink, let's say you used up your Rubine red here, you can reuse this bottle. You could wash it out, clean it, clean the dropper as well, and you could fill this with something else if you have more of another ink, or if you want to mix this with another fluid medium, you could pour this into here, maybe combine different colors to create your very own custom color that you like. And you could have it in the bottle and have it in the dropper so that you could apply it as if it was made by Liquitex for you. So yes, you can mix whatever you want, and as long as you can keep it airtight, it will be workable for as long as you keep the lid on and keep it in an airtight container so that you can continue to go in and use that mixture, whatever you've come up with, as if it were straight from the bottle.
Okay, more questions here. Do the inks create skins like the paints do?
Ooh, it would be, I would think it would be a lot harder to get a skin from the inks because of the viscosity, where I've been able to get.
Talking.
Ooh, I hear someone's unmuted. So for instance, we've got a bit of a skin forming here from the pouring gel that I used earlier. And that's able to form a skin because of all of the binder that's in there. It sticks together so well that it can stick in a really thick layer that creates a skin. Whereas you'll see the drying here of the ink is so thin that it kind of wipes off. So I would say you're much less likely to get a film of ink unless you add a medium to it. And you could add a medium. You could add a string gel medium. You could add really any of the other mediums that are thicker. And what you would then get is a skin that would form with whatever ink you've added to it. So you could create a skin if you wanted one. But if you don't want a skin, then I would say the inks are perfect for that. They do not create skins unless you add another effect to them. That's fun. I do like working with the skins. The acrylic skins is a lot of fun.
Okay.
Other questions? All right.
From Douglas here, can you use acrylic inks for relief printing or etching instead of printing inks?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you can use these as you would any other inks. So if you wanted to print leaves, you can take a leaf, put out some of your ink, brush it onto whatever surface. It doesn't have to be a leaf, of course, and then just press it on and roll it, and you would get that same effect. They're just an acrylic ink, so they will work in the same way that any other ink will work. And if you find you need a thicker ink, if you want there to be a bit of an impasto, if you're stamping maybe, just add a thickening gel, and you'll get that same effect. So you can play with them quite a lot in printmaking. I really do like printmaking with them. You can use them with stamps, rubber stamps, wood block prints. You could do a little bit of that. You have to work pretty quick because of how quickly it dries, but you could get away with it. You can use them just like any other ink. You can make a fingerprint with them, and it works quite well. You get that effect just as if it was any other. It's almost like working with an ink pad, except that you can customize what's in your ink pad. And that's a lot of fun.
And Douglas is just following up. Can you use it in etchings?
Oh, ooh, I haven't tried that, but I would expect, I don't see why that wouldn't work. Yeah, I would think that if you did, let's say you did a copper etching, and you made the line works, you filled in the ink and buffed off the excess, I would expect that if you did it fast enough, before the ink dried, you should be able to press that into paper, especially if the paper is wet. That might help keep the hydration that you would need to transfer the ink there. I would expect that to work. I haven't tried it, but you could try it, and I think it would work. I don't know why that wouldn't work. It works just like any other ink. The reason that you do etching with perhaps an oil-based ink or color is because it is wet longer. But there are plenty of non-oil-based printing inks that people use. So I would think that you could use an acrylic and be just fine and get away with it. And then have it be perfectly light fast as well. Yeah, I would think that would work. Haven't tried it. Disclaimer, now I want to try it. I do have some etching plates behind me that are staring me in the face now that I will try because that's a very cool idea and I like that a lot. Really good suggestions in this chat. Very creative bunch.
Yes, very active today.
Yeah.
So we have another comment from David providing some
Okay.
more information. So he said he's only used the new Solvar varnish and only Liquitex acrylic,
Okay.
and the ink was sprinkled with a toothbrush.
Sprinkled with a toothbrush. Oh, that's very interesting. Ah, If it was so finely applied with a toothbrush, even then I would have expected that to stick. Hmm. I don't know. I wonder, was that I think he may have mentioned before, if it was a canvas, perhaps it got stuck on the top of the canvas bumps rather than deep in and it maybe wiped off. But I would have expected that to dry and stick just like what I've got here. I sprayed this masking fluid with a brush and I got very fine dots and they held up just fine. So I would expect the ink to be able to perform that way. I can't think of a good reason that it wouldn't have done so, other than perhaps it being wet. So I don't know. I don't know what went wrong there. Try again, I would say. And if it continues to be an issue, then do reach out and we can kind of talk about it more because something strange is happening there that I haven't experienced. So I can't really give you advice on it. Yeah, I don't know. I've never had an issue with layering ink on top of ink or something else. As I'm doing here, it's sticking just fine. It's not coming up. It's staying where I put it. I don't know what's wrong there. Any other questions, thoughts? You'll see the masking fluid that I'm erasing now is leaving really nice, clean brushstroke lines from where I put them down earlier, and I'm getting just a really nice texture as a result of that. And you can see the dots as well are a really nice, clean set of dots and edges. And this is kind of the fun part, the reveal of masking fluid, that you get that really nice removal of masking fluid that goes straight back to the white of the page. And that's really a lot of fun. And even if you apply it thinly enough, you get a little bit of speckling because the coverage isn't fully complete. And that's actually quite nice too, that it's almost like a negative painting that you can see the effects of a brush without the brush having made. And I think that's very interesting that you're using the masking fluid in a way that maybe a digital artist might use an eraser, that you can just pick up the color and remove it from where it was placed. I think that's a very cool thing that traditional artists hundreds of years ago maybe didn't have the option to do. Although they did have latex, so I imagine they could have gotten away with it if they knew about it. But we certainly have at our disposals far more approaches to masking than our ancestors may have had. Other questions, thoughts, impressions?
So it seems like we're all good on questions for now.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right, so then we get to continue with the reveal of the pieces that we've got here. Let me just make sure I've got the masking fluid coming off. And even on this one, I applied it fairly thinly, and you see I get this really nice, clean paper effect that was left from when I covered the original paper before I put down that wash, and I get a really fun texture that's almost like leaves in a way, or arrowheads perhaps. And you can see how this is just a lot of fun. You could do it with children, you could do it with really anyone of any age, and it's just a lot of fun to do for mark making, or to be a little more precise with things. And I'm just going to keep revealing. Let's jump to what we did first here, now that that's dry. You'll remember we had a layer of color down here that was very light, which I masked over. And now when I remove the masking fluid, you'll see that I have that original color that I was able to protect. Let's just peel it all up in one long go. There's some masking fluids that are really hard to remove. This is not one of them. It comes off very easily. And you can see that I've got the color protected underneath that darker color that I put down later. And so you can just keep layering and layering. You can imagine if you were working with watercolor, you can use this masking fluid with watercolor, by the way. What this would let you do is continue to protect your bright areas, whether or not they have color. You can always just put this down on something that you like the look of and don't want to ruin, don't want to spill on. And until your piece is done, you'll just leave it. And then you don't have to worry about it, because I have had spills on watercolor pieces that were completely catastrophic because I didn't protect the areas I should have protected. And that's my fault. And now I know better. And now I will mask out anything that I'm working on to make sure that I don't accidentally destroy the piece by spilling. And watercolor is a little bit fickle that way, that it only takes one little mistake, one oversight to obliterate a piece that you've been working on for a really long time, potentially. And you'll see I can use my finger to peel this up. As long as the piece is very dry, I don't have to worry about that. If the piece is potentially a little more wet, I would use the eraser just to make sure that the oils in my hand don't re-wet anything that might still be active and workable. But you'll see I was able to protect those lines that I really liked. The texturing, I was able to cover that up. So now we almost have a bit of a fire effect happening. Or even looks like a tree, perhaps. Like I'm peering through a veil into a forest. There's a lot that you can do with it. And when you stop trying to get really precise, you can get these really interesting effects that you wouldn't have planned otherwise. And I'm removing the speckles over on this piece here. And even where I put the thicker application, that mixture of gouache, even that is coming up where I had the masking fluid underneath it and leaving these really nice clean speckles that I find to be really interesting and kind of unite the piece with a little bit of texture, a little bit of intrigue that wasn't there before. It's also a lot of fun to remove. It's like peeling glue off of your fingers, if you ever got to do that when you were in grade school. There's a bit of that sensation of just peeling and removing that is really quite nice. And therapeutic even. Let's see, did I get it all? And you can feel to tell where the areas are that have it or don't. You just rub your hands. If you feel something a little bit rubbery, that is masking fluid. And if you erase it, it should come right up. Yeah, I've got a few pieces I missed in there. It's looking pretty good. So here's some of the versatility. I mean, look at the variety that we've got just on this single piece of layers, of colors, of texturing, of globbing that you can get just by mixing inks with mediums and masking fluid. You can do a lot with it, and you can write with it. And I really do recommend writing with it. It is a lot of fun. If I switch back over here to my precision board, let's call it, this should be, yep, that should be dry. So I'm going to just remove the masking fluid that I've got in text here to kind of show you the more high quality, precise work that you can do with masking fluid. And to get these lines, I used this number, where is it? There we go. This number 6 brush, flat brush here, in masking fluid. Again, I dipped that into my mixture of dish soap and water before I used the masking fluid, and that is to protect my brush. And I was able to get a kind of gothic font here using that flat brush. And if I remove it, the masking fluid that is, you'll see I get a really nice combination of clean lines where I applied it more thickly and a kind of interesting texturing from where I applied it very thinly. That leaves you this texture that is a little bit of the color, the overpainting, but not so much of it that you can't read what I've put down. So let me just get a little bit more of that cleaned up. And you can see the contrast is really showing through here because I made a nice dark overlayer. I get a really clear read on what I've put down, and I'll continue to erase what's there. This was a thicker application, so you see I get a much cleaner line. And that is a style choice. If you like having that bit of texturing here, just go with a thinner layer. If you like having really clean white lines, then I would go with a thicker application of masking fluid. There's a lot you can do with it. And of course, I could then mask over the pink here and create more text that would end up being pink. I would just have to paint over that with something darker or something opaque. I could use a soft body, a white soft body, for instance, or a white gouache, and I could paint over the masking fluid and I would still be getting the effect of the masking. As long as I painted thinly enough, you can always take the masking fluid off. If you put it under something really, really thick, if you masked and then put an impasto over that, then I would say that isn't the best use of masking fluid. I don't know that that would be able to come off if you fully covered it with a really thick layer. But for anything that's really thin like this, that's exactly what masking fluid is for. Just covering something up in a way that you can peel off later. And it comes up really easily and leaves me with a nice, clean, interesting texture. And again, I really like the texture. It almost looks like tape when you peel up tape and it doesn't come up all the way. That's kind of the effect that we're getting here. And I really like that. Have some big globs over on this piece too that I'll wipe off. You can imagine doing a Dalmatian and leaving the dots is one small use you could think of for using masking fluid in a bit more of a representational way. If you're doing the highlights in a watercolor on a face or in the eye, that's another really good use for water, for a resist, a masking fluid, but really anything where you put something down and you think, I really don't want this to move. I like the way that it is. That's what you're using a masking fluid for. Now, we did mention Inktober because that is what we are celebrating this month. And the 17th day of Inktober is ornate. That is the theme. And so I wrote that down in text here, and I'm about to remove it. You can see the sheen of the masking fluid. And it looks a little uneven, but that's because of the masking fluid collecting some of that ink. But of course, it's about to come right off and give us a really clear text. And you'll notice that as I'm erasing, I'm not affecting any of this darker layer. It's not coming off because, again, once the acrylic has dried, it is fixed in place. It's not going to come up. So I can erase. I wouldn't erase too hard. I don't want to hurt the paper. But I can erase here pretty firmly with a regular eraser and not be worried that I'm going to take up any of my ink. It's just dried in place. It's fixed. It's not going anywhere. It can take a little bit more of an aggressive erasing here without any problem, any harm coming to it. You can see we can get some really cool, detailed texturing happening. And this is a little bit tricky, if you can see the masking fluid as you're working with it. And so I like to angle my light a little bit down, and that shows me the sheen of what I'm working with. It is a little bit clear when it goes down, so it can be a bit difficult to see. But if you're able to see it, if you have the lighting scenario to help you see it, you can get these really, really cool, clean effects of white on a dark page. Or any page. I could have painted this red. I could have gone the turquoise deep. I have a lot of colors to play with here that I could experiment with. And I could write a lot more. I could write it bigger. I could write it in different font styles. There's nothing to stop me from getting really, really creative and making any kind of shape, any line work that I want. It could be text. It could be an image. There really is no limit on how you use the inks. It's as if you had a pen that you could also use as a paint. You see, I get a kind of a spooky look. This is a Gothic font here. And so we're getting a little bit more Halloween-y, a little more in the direction of spooky and Gothic and dark. And I think that's quite thematic and appropriate for being in October as we are. Any other questions, thoughts? None at the moment. I do have another far more complex piece that I think is worth looking at if you can see it. And let's see if we can see it. But it's based off of an illuminated manuscript drawing. Whoop. Can I get it? Can I get it? Let's see. Ah, there we go. Maybe shade it a little bit better. It's a little bit hard to see, but it's a lion with wings. That's a little bit difficult to see, but I really liked it. And so I've masked off a bit of the areas that I want to keep light. And I'm just going to go in and I'm just going to paint this to get a little bit closer in the direction of detail work that you might see in a more detailed painting. And maybe you like to do that. I certainly like to get a little more detailed in my work. If I can find my copper ink, which has disappeared from in front of me. Oh, there it is. Huh. Illuminated manuscripts, of course, have metal leafing. Often that is gold leaf because gold does not tarnish over time. But here I'm going to use my antique copper, my iridescent copper, and I'm just going to line that in the boundary of the piece that I've got and keep inking away. I'm very interested to know what type of work people make because it sounds like we have a real variety of interests. I've heard about inking on plates. I've heard about leaf printmaking. I just really like hearing what other people work on when they do work. As I try to make a
So
straight. Yeah, go
we
ahead.
have some comments and questions in the chat.
Okay.
So Lily Ann is asking, are you going to show us any more of your finished projects or artwork? We would love to see them.
Oh, well, I'm happy to. Yeah, absolutely. I have a piece that I really like that will show you a little bit of masking fluid usage. And it was done in watercolor, but because it uses masking fluid, I think it's a bit relevant, so I can show you that. Let's grab it. This is a piece I quite like. And it uses the masking fluid very subtly. I want to see if we can get closer without that glare that we've got. And I've used it just a little bit around the eye. Can I get that more detailed? There we go. Right around the eye and the mouth of this fish. Whoop, is where I used that masking fluid. And it was just a little bit, but it was enough to get a really convincing light effect that I really wouldn't have been able to get otherwise. Because when you're doing a really even flush of paint, it can be very difficult to avoid accidentally getting your color in the wrong place. And that's true of inks and of watercolors. And again, I would say that I've started using inks more in place of watercolors, or at least as the underpainting for watercolors, because it fixes in place, because I don't have to worry about it moving around and going somewhere that I don't want. There's a lot that you can do with an ink. Let me see some other ink pieces that I've got. I have some up in a show at the moment, so a lot of what I usually show is not here. Oh, that's a piece that I did partially with ink and partially with soft body. It's a little cow scene. And you'll see that it's a really nice flat coverage here because I was working with inks. And I went over that with the titanium white gouache, but it was ink in the underpainting. So I've got some really kind of subtle earthy colors there, but the greens are quite vibrant. And I really liked working with the inks here because of that spreadability, especially where I worked quite quickly. I think this was maybe a 15-minute or a 20-minute quick study for a larger piece. It really went down quite quickly. I think color studies are an excellent place to be using inks because you don't have to think too much about them. You can lay them down, but the colors will really stand through. And that's something I think is really, really, really unique to inks, that the vibrancy is there, especially when you water down. And I do add quite a bit of water when I'm doing my initial layer. I do get it quite thin so that I can get an even spread. That's definitely where I would use inks the most. Otherwise, I do find myself using the heavy bodies quite a bit, especially the bio-based heavy bodies. Have become quite fond of because of their impasto, their thickness. I really enjoy that quite a bit. But really, I'll use whatever acrylics I have on hand, and I find them fairly interchangeable in that I can pick up whatever I have and be able to produce what I want to produce, regardless of whether it's an ink or a heavy body, unless I've got a very, very specific usage in mind. And I don't often. I usually will pick a subject and I just want to render that subject with the color, the lighting effect. So whatever's on hand, I will use. And if it's the inks, especially the metallic inks, I really quite like, especially for something like this, for an illuminated manuscript effect with a little bit of metallic. There we go. A little bit of a metallic. Oh yeah, you can see that quite well. That's not too strong. I could go into gold leafing. It's just a little bit higher risk, higher reward to actually use metal leaf. And when I don't want to have to worry about that, a metallic is perfectly fine. It works really well. It's got that iridescence to it that is really catching when you walk past it. It shimmers, it changes with the light. And I think it will play really well with this piece that is meant to be a bit of a medieval style. It's meant to be a little rudimentary. That's something I want visible here. It's a stylized piece. It's not meant to be photorealistic. And I do enjoy photorealism when I get the chance, but I don't have to. Sometimes you just play for fun and you do a little bit of font because you like it. Other questions?
Yep.
Continue.
So
Yeah.
we have a comment here.
Okay.
Crazy idea. Can we tint the masking liquid like that? We can see it on white paper.
Ooh, oh, that's a great idea. Let's try. I had that in the back of my head while we were working. Oh, what am I going to do that on? Yeah, I'll do it on here. Let's try that because I haven't tried it before. And I bet you it'll be interesting. I would think that would work. I would think it would tint underneath as long as you let it dry. And I regret that I won't be able to really let it dry here. But let's just see what happens. Why not? So we'll take our masking fluid. Shake it up, put a little bit in. And let's use, which color haven't I used? Let's use the Bismuth yellow, which is pretty strong for being a yellow. You can see it's really, really vibrant. And I'll just tint it not too subtly. Yellow is a very light value, so we do want it to shine through. And we'll mix it. I'll use my number 6 brush here. Just mix it, maybe add a little bit more so we can really, actually, let's make an orange. Let's add that with the fluorescent red to get a really, really bright orange color. And that way we can see it and see if it actually does work. Ooh, that's nice. It's a kind of vibrant peachy color. That's really pretty. All right, so let's see if we can mask our face and our pumpkin from earlier. From the drawing section. There we go. We're going to mask those guys just to see if we can get the color and the masking in one fell swoop, because that would be very efficient, wouldn't it? And we'll cover it up. Cover that, and let's cover the hair as well. All right, let's leave that, and I'm very interested to see how this works. I haven't tried it before, but this is the spirit of Liquitex. Like, oh, let's try that. I haven't tried tinting masking fluid. Why not? Let's do it. There's no reason it shouldn't work. I expect it to work. Maybe it won't. I don't know. We're going to find out. We'll see. I hope it dries in time. I think it should. It's a pretty thin layer of masking fluid, so I would expect it to be able to dry. I hope that works. I think that would be very interesting and have a lot of very interesting applications if it does work. I'm realizing I didn't take up the masking fluid that I have over here, so I'll keep doing that. Ooh, there we go. Any other questions? There's a lot you can do here. If you're thinking, hey, I haven't tried this, let's do it. Go for it. See what happens. If it doesn't work, you'll know that it doesn't work. If it does work, you'll have come up with your very own new approach to using acrylics that no one has before. And acrylics were invented in 1995, so they're one of the newer types of pigments, types of paints that exist, but they use the pigments that oils use. We use the same pigments that watercolors use. A titanium white has titanium in it. So an acrylic with titanium has the exact same pigment that an oil with titanium, a watercolor with titanium has. You're getting the same pigments and you're getting, in this case, the same pigment load. So you're still getting that high quality vibrancy of color. It's just a different vehicle for that pigment to stick to the page. And because it's newer, there's a lot you can do to experiment with it. It's meant for experimentation. we at Liquitex really like to play with things and see how they interact. And we're always inventing new things. There's an R&D department that has come up with the bio-based heavy body acrylics, which work really well and have on average 50% bio-based sourcing. So it's algae, it's agricultural residues, corns, things like that to replace some of the acrylic that's in there with something that's a little more sustainable, easier to get, safer on the planet. And that's just part of the experimentation with acrylic, that it's new and there's a lot that can be done that hasn't been done yet, that the team is working on, that we get to play with, that I get to play with as a demo artist. We just got a new line of metallic soft bodies, I think it was, that came out that I'm getting to play with now, which is a lot like the iridescent copper that we've got here. It's meant for experimentation. Liquitex is about playing and pushing boundaries and finding your own approach as an artist, your own voice as an artist. Really good questions. Any thoughts, final thoughts, other questions? I think we'll probably start wrapping up here. I see that it's been almost 2 hours. This has been very engaging, everyone. I'm very excited to hear all of what you all are working on. I don't know if this guy's gonna be able to dry in time, but I hope so. Fingers crossed. Final questions or thoughts?
We don't have any questions, but we have a lot of artists clearly in here,
Okay.
and they're sharing what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I have been messing around with gel prints and alcohol inks, lots of fun. Jennifer said, I'm an impasto artist. I love using/mixing in all sorts of mediums with that. A lot of different mediums, very interesting.
Yeah, wow. I personally I really like using different mediums and seeing how the different medium affects the way that I paint something. So if I did do a watercolor of this fish, for instance, the way that I would do that in a heavy body acrylic would be very different. I think it's very interesting to play with other mediums and to see what works better for some subjects and what works better for other subjects.
Like Abby mentioned earlier, we're almost out of time. So if you have any last minute questions, this would be a good time. If you think about any other questions, you can email us, info@abovegroundartsupplies.com, or just contact or any of our stores. We have a lovely staff that are happy to help. I'm seeing a lot of good feedback for today's demo. Thank you so much, Abby.
To
It's
hear
been
that.
great.
Absolutely. And I can tell you a bit more about where you might find me if anyone is interested. At the moment, I'm in Fitchburg area in Massachusetts, in the United States. So I don't know how many of you will be nearby, but if you are, I've got a show up at the moment at the Gallery Marquee on the main drag in Fitchburg, which is of human by human figurative art in the era of AI. So we're exploring, comparing traditionally made artworks in oil and watercolor and graphites with AI derivatives. And that one's been a lot of fun. There's been really interesting dialogues that have come out of that one. I also teach at Prescott Community Center in Groton. If anyone's interested in more acrylic painting with me or drawing classes or portrait oil painting, I do that as well. And it is open studios this week in Fitchburg, so I will be painting live in Fitchburg if anyone is around. And I'm doing an artist talk tomorrow, Saturday at 5 p.m. if anyone's in the area. Again, that's at Gallery Marquee in Fitchburg. You can find more about that on my website. And you can find me on Instagram at AB Williams Art. And I'd love to talk more with you all and continue the conversation. And you can see more of my finished work there. Of course, I have a lot of pieces and a lot of mediums. So come take a look. See the acrylics that I work in, the oils, the watercolors. I do some woodworking too. I do quite a bit, and I'm happy to talk with people about it. So it's been a real pleasure. Any final thoughts, questions as we wrap up here? I hope that our experiment goes well. I'm very excited about it. That was a really good suggestion. Here's our final spread that we've come up with today. Ta-da! A lot of variety there. And here's that other piece. I'll be posting some of this on my Instagram when I finish it as well. This piece especially, I'm very excited about. Okay. No more questions. It's been lovely meeting you all. And I hope to see you all in future demos. This has been really quite a lovely way to spend an almost Halloween evening. We're close. We're not there yet. We're almost there. Stay spooky, get inked up, and enjoy experimenting. Enjoy the process.